All right, the project's due on Wednesday, and on Wednesday when you submit that, then I'll load the last homework assignment of the semester, which it'll be due after Thanksgiving. We don't have any class next week because of Thanksgiving, and then the week after that it's our final week of the semester. So we're going to be talking about some ideas from chapter 19 in the book starting this week related to uncertainty, risk, and some ways to perform analysis for profitability depending on the effects of uncertainty. So does anybody have any announcement-related questions that they want to ask before we start talking about uncertainty?
What day is the homework going to be due after break, Monday or Wednesday?
I don't remember. Let's check the schedule. So the last assignment will be due on Wednesday, December 4th. Other questions? All right. So far this semester, if I gave you an in-class exercise, it would normally just say definitively, without any kind of ambiguity, how much profit you could expect in the future. Or I'd just tell you how much something was going to cost, or what the interest rates would be, or maybe even most crazy, what the inflation rate would be through time. The truth is we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we can look to the past to give some idea of maybe the range of likely values, but things that have never happened before happen all the time. And so, even if we use the spectrum of past performance as a guide, we sometimes are still surprised. So we have to account for that, or at least be aware of it, when we perform economic analysis. The fact that future conditions are unknown, and it's difficult to predict which way they may go. And so if you're planning for the future and trying to decide whether to make an investment in new capabilities, or if you're planning for the future and you're trying to decide an appropriate pricing for a product you're going to sell, or if you're trying to set aside enough money to make sure you've got a pool of funds for maintenance of equipment, all of those things can have risk associated with them because we don't know what the future costs or the future economic conditions are likely to be. Things vary a lot, and we don't know what direction, or sometimes we do know what direction it's going to go, but we just don't know what the timing's going to be. And most people would feel really comfortable with the idea that 10 years in the future, the U.S. economy is going to be bigger than it is now, but how much bigger? And in between now and then, we're going to go through dips, but when will the dips be? It's almost impossible to know for sure. So because of that uncertainty, we have to be prepared. And uncertainty can exist in politics, where changes in government policies can have a huge effect on industries. So there's speculation, for example, that a lot of the renewable energy initiatives that were started during the Biden administration are going to be de-emphasized or maybe even defunded during the upcoming second Trump administration. He's more enthusiastic about petroleum and fossil fuel and less interested in renewable energy. And so the subsidies and the funds for development may go away. Natural disasters such as hurricanes can have a huge effect. Nobody would have predicted, for example, that at the beginning of this year that a hurricane would cause damage in eastern Tennessee. I mean, maybe people would have guessed that for the Gulf Coast or for Florida. But normally hurricane risk isn't quite a factor for the state of Tennessee, but it happened. Billions of dollars worth of damage. So natural disasters and weather conditions like the unexpected drought that we've had in West Virginia this summer and through the fall caused a lot of wildfires. And there's been wildfires all along the East Coast that have created disruption, air quality problems. There can be economic bubbles, and we've talked about some of the bubbles from the past. We talked about the housing bubble of the mid-2000s, the internet bubble of 1999 and 2000. and maybe whether we're going through an AI bubble at the moment. Maybe we are. Some things end up not being bubbles, and so there's uncertainty about if it's going to pop, and if so, when. So some of the decisions that you're likely to face in engineering that are related to all of these things are how many new employees to hire and when to hire them. You may have noticed if you went to the career fair that they had over in the rec center in October that there were a lot of engineering and computer science employers there. Probably of the, I think there was maybe 115 companies in attendance. Certainly more than 30, and I think probably approaching 40 of them were looking specifically for engineers and computer science majors, which is kind of shocking if you consider that engineering and computer science is just a tiny fraction of the overall student body at Marshall. But there's a lot of demand for hiring right now, but is it possible that some of that could go down in the future? Things go through cycles, and so for instance, the infrastructure spending that's been driving the boom of civil engineering employment, that's something that political factors or even economic factors could make less probable to continue indefinitely. Like there's a lot of concern, for example, that neither political party seems very interested in getting the budget deficit under control. And the budget deficit is just the difference between the tax revenue that the federal government is taking in and the spending that it does. And it takes in a lot less revenue than it is spending, and it has to finance the difference by selling bonds. And it's just every year, year after year, there's more debt that the U.S. government has, and concerns are that since neither political party wants to raise taxes, but both political parties want to keep spending money, that the debt could become unsustainable, which would drive up interest rates and would make it more difficult for the federal government to borrow money to do infrastructure type projects. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And because of that uncertainty, it brings risk. Here's just an illustration of, the things that we don't know and that what people maybe wouldn't have predicted. I guess if there's one thing we do know in the case of Bitcoin, it's that there's a lot of volatility. It's an asset class that doesn't represent anything tangible. And so that's one of the reasons that there's a lot of volatility, is that there's no underlying use case for Bitcoin. It's not like copper, where copper is actually used in a lot of electronic products, and it's used in a lot of the materials that we buy. Like there's a physical use case for copper, which kind of stabilizes the price, because even if there's a little bit of speculative buying, because maybe some people think the price of copper is going to go up, and so that potentially could drive up the price of it. There's if people have bought copper, then they can sell it because it's consumed. Bitcoin, though, so far is just mostly a speculative asset class. And if you look at where the price was a year ago, it was at $36,000. And then today, the price is $92,000. And so, if we think about that's more than double, and it's nearly triple the price, what will it be a year from now? I mean, I certainly don't know, but I think it's just as likely it could be back down into the 30,000 range, or maybe it could be 150,000 or higher. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, and you have to sometimes ask, why is there uncertainty? Why is there volatility in a certain asset class? And so in the case of Bitcoin, it's because when people buy Bitcoin, it's not because it somehow fulfills some unmet need that previously other ways of transmitting money weren't accounting for. Maybe the only thing that Bitcoin is able to do that other tools aren't is that it's independent of government factors. So just the number of Bitcoins in circulation is fixed, and governments can't do deficit spending and affect the price of Bitcoin because of that. But risk is the potential for adverse changes. And so we think of risk as a negative thing. So uncertainty has an upside and a downside. And so risk is the downside that comes with uncertainty. So it's the changes that could negatively impact a business, industry, or an economy. And we can, broadly speaking, divide risks up into two main areas. So there's the risks that we know about because they've happened before, and sometimes we even know a likely range in what might happen. So for instance, we know statistically speaking how many hurricanes have come through South Florida in the last 100 years. And so based on the past experiences, we can just kind of say that there's a range of likely values in any given year when it comes to hurricanes. And it seems like hurricane frequency is increasing with the climate variability that's been going up and up from year to year. But still, there's a range of possibilities that we kind of know what the risk is and how much it might be. So another thing that we know is the risk of death. So the risk of death is really of a lot of interest to insurance companies. And so actuarials are people who analyze the risk of death, and then they will sell you life insurance, and then the price you pay for the life insurance is related to your risk of death. And so if you're buying life insurance and you have maybe high cholesterol and a high BMI and you're sedentary, then the premium that they're going to charge for life insurance for that person may be different from somebody who's in good health and exercises. But maybe by far the biggest risk of death is age. Once you get to age 90, the probability of dying in any given year is 20%. So that means you've got a 1 in 5 chance of dying in a given year once you're 90 years old. But of course, the risk of death when you're young is very, very low on a percentage basis. So these are known risks. Unknown risks are either the things that we, like the things that we never would have even thought of as a possibility of happening, or those things where we know it's a thing, but we don't know how likely it is. So we know, for example, that a computer virus could shut down a factory's production, but we just don't know what the probability of that occurring is. So a given facility like the Toyota facility here in West Virginia, there is a chance that a computer virus could cause it to shut down, but it would be difficult for an insurance company to price a policy, but they simply don't know how likely that is. So the risk of someone so-called going postal, I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. Somebody went postal, and that phrase came into use, I don't know, probably in the 90s when just a series of postal workers got really aggravated and disgruntled and would go to work with a gun and go crazy. And so the school shooting thing is maybe more recent. People joke around all the time. I guess maybe it's kind of gallows humor, as they say. These risks that we don't know the likelihood of it, but we know that it could exist. So, risks of really obscure events like a volcano blowing up in western Montana. There's seismic activity there. There's volcanoes potentially historically that could become reactivated, but we just have a difficulty prioritizing and preparing for those risks because their likelihood is not well understood. So here is a look at some of the risks we can plan for. So of known risks and unknown risks, let's start with the known risks because we have the tools to analyze them. We should be prepared for the things that are foreseeable. And the things that aren't foreseeable, if there truly isn't anything we can do to prepare for them, then there's no sense worrying about it. You want to be resilient, and oftentimes preparing for the known risks will also make you more effective at dealing with the unknown risks, because oftentimes they have kind of like common paths to prepare for them that would make you more resilient against both. So let's talk about some of the known risks that we're aware of and how we could prepare for it. So one of the big risks is that interest rates could change. And here's a look at just what has been a monumental shift that has really caused a lot of challenges for people who are trying to buy a home. Back in January of 2021, the mortgage interest rate was at almost an all-time low of 2.65% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And that's the most common type of mortgage. When someone is borrowing money from the bank to buy a house, the 30-year term seems to be the most popular because it's affordable, and a fixed rate mortgage People like the security of knowing what their payments are going to be the whole time. There are different types of mortgages called an adjustable rate mortgage, or ARM. But an adjustable rate mortgage is scary to people because what can happen is that after 5 or 7 years of having a stable interest rate, then it just kind of defaults to whatever the market interest rate is at that time. So somebody back in January of 2021 would be crazy to do anything other than a fixed rate mortgage because it was historically low, not likely to go any lower. And if they had done an adjustable rate mortgage, they'd be really sorry when 5 years later, 7 years later, they had to reprice at the mortgage interest rate at that time. You can see that back in October of 2023, it was approaching 8%, and it's come down a little bit since then, but it's still quite a bit higher. And it may not sound like a big difference, 2% versus 7%, but if you actually go to the factor tables, and you look at what is somebody's payment that they have to make on, let's say, if they're buying a $200,000 house, the payment difference from a 2.65% interest versus an 8% interest. Let's actually do that because I want to make the point that it's a much bigger deal than you might think if you just think, well, 6% is not that big of a difference. So let's say that someone was buying a house, the present value of the house was $200,000. All right, and the number of periods is 30 years at 12 months per year, so that is 360 periods. And then the interest rate, let's start off with this interest rate of 2.65% from January 7th. If you timed it just right, 265, it was 265, right? I was just looking at it. All right. So what is the payment in a case like that? So let's do the payment function, PMT, the rate, number of periods, and the present value. All right. That doesn't seem quite right. Oh, I need to know the interest rate per period. Okay. So it would be, this is the interest rate per year, but the interest rate per month is what I want to know. All right, that's more like it. So the conclusion here is if you have 2.65% per year interest, the monthly payment is $806. Now, someone buying a house would also have to pay taxes and insurance. And it's customary, if you've got a mortgage with the bank, the mortgage servicer will usually bill you for both of those things along with the loan repayment. So, if you had to pay $806 for the loan, they'd probably also take out an extra $300 a month to cover your insurance and the property tax. But this is just to show like how the interest rate changes the effect of the house payment. So that is someone who bought a house in January of 2021. What if they got at this 7.97%? So 0.0797, again dividing it by 12 because we want to know the interest rate per period. It would take it from 806 to 1463. So it's the same house, it's the same purchase price, but if you have 7.97% per year interest, the monthly mortgage payment is $1,463. But actually, to add insult to injury, it wasn't just the interest rates that went up during this period. It was also the underlying price of the house that went up, because a lot of people were working at home rather than going to the office, and suddenly they felt like, well, if I'm working at home and my wife is working at home and the kids are going to school at home, a lot of people suddenly realized that they wanted a bigger house than they had before. And there was a lot less new construction during COVID. And so there was also a lot of government stimulus spending. You know, people got their free COVID money. And so all of those factors combined, the more demand, less supply, and then the increase in money that everybody had, burning a hole in their pockets, it drove up housing prices kind of a lot. So really, the $200,000 house that you could have bought in 2021 became maybe a $300,000 house because of the huge increase in home prices. And so somebody that could have paid $806 at the beginning of the pandemic, a couple of years later is looking at a house payment of maybe even $2,200. So kind of ruinous, really difficult to plan for and react to that. So that's uncertainty, and it's the negative effects of uncertainty that we're trying to be ready for. So interest rates is one of them. Commodity prices. This is showing just the year on year from within 1 year. I found this nice graph from 2017 that showed the effect of a couple of kind of like world events on price changes. So aluminum prices went up within 1 year by more than 30% because of some stimulus spending in China. Like there was economic growth slowing down in China. The federal government there lowered interest rates, encouraged new construction, kind of had some policies that boosted the demand for industrial metals like aluminum, and the price went up by 30%. Another ironic thing is that in 2016 there were really high prices for sugar, so a lot of farmers planted sugar for the next crop, and then there was an excess of supply which brought the prices down again. And that's actually what we hope capitalism will do. We hope that high prices will incentivize people to do a thing to bring the prices back down again, so there's a match between supply and demand. So, I mean, it's good for the economy as a whole, but then think about the sugar producers who were expecting the 2016 prices, but then everybody had that same expectation, overplanted, and then sugar prices went back down by almost 30%. So the expenses of the things that you're going to buy can vary a lot from year to year. It's safe to assume that they're going to go up unless you want to prepare for the future and you're a seller. You have to think about, are you going to be wiped out if you are a cattle rancher and cattle prices go down by 30% in a given year? Labor availability, if you're in the business of hiring people to do engineering projects or hiring people to do computer science work, you never know if there's going to be a huge pool of available workers or if labor availability is really low. So this is showing just since the 1950s how the unemployment rate has fluctuated and going through ups and downs over time. And we've talked previously about recessions, and so highlighted here are the periods of recession where it's 2 or more consecutive quarters of economic contraction is the definition of a recession. And there's a pretty close relationship between periods of recession and increasing unemployment. But if you are a worker, then it's good to have low unemployment. But if you are an employer, low unemployment just means it's harder to attract qualified workers, and it means that labor prices are going up. So maybe it sounds heartless, but employers prefer these periods where there's lots of labor availability. So they wouldn't maybe say it in the phrase of we want lots of unemployment, but they want lots of available labor because it makes it easier for them to fill positions and they don't have rising wages to contest with. Okay, so let me show you today's in-class exercise. What we're going to do is analyze a scenario with a lot of uncertainty and trying to account for the effects of that uncertainty on how much profits we might be able to make. Let me bring it up on the screen and also hand it out to you. This is something I think we should try to set up on a spreadsheet. So read through this, set it up on a spreadsheet. We want to know for an auto manufacturer that is going to be doing an expansion of their production capability, what's the range in profits that they could expect? What's the maximum high and what's the lowest profits they could expect. And so for each one of these bullet points, what you need to do is you need to kind of think through which one represents the worst case scenario in terms of profitability, and which one is the best case scenario in terms of profitability. And so we're going to do one analysis with all of them considering it being the worst. So really high costs, really high, high costs of everything and low sales price would give us the least profitability. And then the most profitability would be if just our interest rates were low, if the labor and equipment costs were low, but then somehow there was high demand and high prices. Okay, I've been going through my solution. Now, of course, yours doesn't have to look like mine, but we should all have the same final answer for this best case scenario. The best case scenario represents low interest rate because the low interest rate is what determines our annualized capital cost. So in other words, the capital recovery, since we're going to spend $1.2 billion making this new assembly facility, we want to know the annualized cost of that. If we use a 10-year period and the low interest rate, then it's like $154 million. So the profit is going to be the revenue minus all of the costs. And the revenue is just simply the demand multiplied by our highest possible sales price to get $1.2 billion in revenue. So with the costs that we know about, it's possible that the profit could be as high as $813 million per year. So now this is the max profit. I'm going to create a copy of this and have it be the minimum profit. You could also, now I guess, let me do it on the same page because that maybe would make it easier to see things. If I just copy all of this and then paste it next to it. Okay, so I'll just paste it right here. So then this one is going to be the worst case scenario. So the worst case represents high interest rate, low sales volume, low sales price, and high cost. That's kind of what's happening to Jeep right now. You know, we were kind of bagging on Jeep last week. They've been in the news a lot because demand for Jeep is just basically cratered. Nobody wants to buy Jeeps because they're so expensive. So let's see, what is the worst case scenario? High interest rate. Lower demand. Lower sales price. Higher initial cost because of the interest rate. Labor rates are higher. Highest labor rate, so highest labor rate. So it looks like that the profits could go as low as $192 million. Still seems pretty good, but not as good as $800 million. So what we did is we considered the lowest possible costs combined with the highest possible prices and demand. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we considered the highest costs and the lowest demand and the lowest price. But what we haven't done is we haven't put in the most likely outcome. And that's what we're going to do on Wednesday. Is we're going to play around with a technique that allows us to not only look at like the two extremes, but also to come up with a probability distribution of the most likely outcome. And then it generates a statistical distribution of the likely profits. And so you're probably already familiar with the idea of a bell curve, right? Where maybe the highest possible and the lowest possible values, so let's just use the chip prices. 375 is the lowest possible price for the chip. The highest possible was 1250. But most of the probability exists in some middle range. So if you want to know more than just what's possible, but what's likely, what you can do is you can take each one of these variables and you can define a probability distribution and then have it do multiple simulations where it's considering a variety of combinations of each. So that's what we're going to talk about on Wednesdays. Like, take this same idea but enhance its usefulness by a lot by putting in the likelihood of each particular outcome. So I will see you in class on Wednesday.